The morning my daughter-in-law handed me a cup of tea and smiled, I thought she was finally coming around. That was the thing about her. She could be warm when she wanted something. It was mid-October, one of those mornings in Nova Scotia when the light comes in low through the kitchen window and everything looks gentler than it is. The maples on the back property had gone deep red. My husband Kenneth had planted 3 of them the year we bought the house, back in 1987. He said they would outlast us both. He was right about that at least. Kenneth passed in the spring. Pancreatic cancer, fast and unforgiving. By June, I was alone in a house that suddenly felt enormous, and my son and his wife had started coming around more often. At first, I told myself it was grief. They were grieving too. We all were. But something sat uneasy in me. The way my daughter-in-law would walk through the rooms slowly, pausing at doorways. The way she asked, once, whether I had found a financial planner yet, whether I had looked into downsizing. I had not looked into downsizing. I was 67 years old, and I had lived in that house for 36 years, and I was not ready to have that conversation. I told her so, politely. She smiled again and said, of course, there was no rush. That was in August. By October, the visits had become weekly. The envelope arrived on a Thursday. I had driven into town to pick up a prescription and stopped at the small cafe on Inglis Street that I have been going to for years. It does not have a clever name or a loyalty app or oat milk variations. It has good coffee, and the woman behind the counter knows my order. That is enough for me. I sat at my usual table near the window and watched the street. The harbor was visible if you leaned slightly, which I did out of habit. Kenneth and I used to bring our coffee down to the waterfront on weekend mornings. I still drove past it sometimes, but I had not stopped. A woman sat down at the table beside me. I did not recognize her. She was perhaps 10 years younger than me, well dressed in that quiet, understated way. A good wool coat, no jewelry to speak of. She ordered something at the counter, and then when she sat back down, she looked at me directly. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Evelyn Marsh?" I said yes, I was. She reached into her bag and set a plain white envelope on the table between us. My name was written on it in Kenneth's handwriting. I stared at it. "He gave this to me 8 months ago," she said. "He made me promise to wait until fall. He said you would need it more then than you do now." I could not speak. I looked from the envelope to her face and back again. She had kind eyes, steady. "Who are you?" I finally managed. She said her name was Frances. She said she and Kenneth had gone to the same church group. A small weekday one, not the main congregation, just a handful of people who met to talk. She said she had not come forward sooner because she had made him a promise. "He trusted you very much," she said, "and he was worried." She did not say anything else after that. She paid for her coffee, put on her coat, and left. I sat there for a long time before I touched the envelope. I was still sitting there when my coffee went cold. I did not open it in the cafe. I do not know why exactly. Some instinct told me I needed to be somewhere private, somewhere that was mine. I drove home, walked past the kitchen without stopping, and sat down in Kenneth's chair in the front room. The one by the window that faces the yard. The envelope had been sealed with tape over the flap, the way he always did when something mattered to him. He was a careful man. He thought before he spoke, and he sealed his envelopes with tape. Inside was a letter, handwritten, 3 pages, and a smaller sealed envelope with the words "open" if needed on the front. I read the letter twice. He had written it in February, when he already knew. He had not told me then how certain the diagnosis was. And reading the letter, I understood that he had been protecting me from the knowing, which is such a Kenneth thing to do that I had to stop and press my hand flat against the page for a moment. He wrote that he had something to tell me that he could not say out loud, that when he tried to form the words, they would not come. That writing them was easier. He had started noticing things, he said, when my daughter-in-law began asking questions about the property. It had begun simply enough. She had asked once whether the house was in both our names, and he had said yes, of course. Then she had asked whether we had updated our wills recently, and he had said they were fine. But the questions kept coming, small and spread out, casual enough that he might have let them go if they had come from someone else. From her, they gathered meaning. He had looked into some things on his own. A friend, a retired solicitor, had gone through some paperwork with him. What he found was not criminal, not yet, but it was concerning. My son had been named as sole executor in an older version of the will, the one from 2003, before Kenneth had updated it in 2019. Somehow, my daughter-in-law had gotten a copy of the older document. Kenneth did not know how, but she had referenced a clause from it once, casually, as though she was simply curious, and that clause had not been in the version that was discussed openly with anyone. She had a copy of a document she should not have had. Kenneth had spoken to our actual solicitor. He had updated everything again, quietly, in March. He had left the instructions in the smaller envelope. He ended the letter by telling me he loved me, that he was sorry he could not say this to my face, that he needed me to be careful and to not let them rush me into anything. I sat in his chair until the room went dark. I want to be honest about what the weeks after that were like, because it was not simple. It was not a matter of reading the letter and knowing immediately what to do. It was confusing and it was painful, and there were days when I told myself I was misreading everything, that Kenneth had been frightened by his illness and had seen shadows where there were none, that my son was just a man who sometimes let his wife do the talking, that this was grief making me suspicious of people I was supposed to love. My son had not been a warm child, exactly, but he had not been cold either. He was quiet. He worked in commercial real estate in the city, and he was good at it. He called on Sundays. He came for Christmas. He sent flowers when Kenneth died. His wife was the one who made me uneasy. She always had, if I am honest, but I had told myself that was just the difference in personality. Some women are warm, some are efficient. I had tried not to judge her for being efficient, but after reading the letter, I thought back over the last several years differently. The way she had started joining every visit, when before she often stayed home. The way she asked about the furnace, the roof, the property assessment. Whether I had considered a trust, whether I knew what probate costs were like in Nova Scotia now. And then there was the conversation that had happened in September, 2 months earlier, that I had pushed to the back of my mind because I had not known what to do with it. She had come over alone. My son was supposedly stuck at work. We had tea, and she had brought a folder. She called it just some information. And inside it were brochures for 3 different retirement communities in the HRM area. She walked me through each one. She talked about equity release and market timing, and how property values in my area had peaked and might not hold. She was not unkind. That is what made it so disorienting. She was patient, and she smiled, and she explained everything clearly. The way you explain things to someone you are afraid might not keep up. I said I would think about it. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table and felt something I could not name. Not quite fear, not quite anger. Something in between that I had no word for. Now I had a word for it. I went to see our solicitor on my own. His name is on the second page of the letter. I had met him twice before, at Kenneth's side, and he shook my hand and said he had been expecting I might come in eventually. He had the updated will. He walked me through it carefully. The house and property were mine outright, with full authority to do as I chose. My son was not the executor. A trust had been arranged through a third party for certain assets. It was all legal, and it was all current, and there was nothing that could be quietly undone without my signature. I felt a complicated relief sitting in that office. The kind that comes with understanding that something bad was being attempted, and that someone who loved you had already thought ahead. I asked the solicitor what I should do about my daughter-in-law having the old document. He said that holding an old copy of a will was not itself illegal, but using it to pressure someone to extract decisions based on a document that had been superseded was another matter. He said I had options. He said the important thing was to not sign anything without calling him first. I told him I had no intention of signing anything. I want to tell you about the night things came to a head, because that is the part that still sits in my chest when I think about it. It was the first week of November. My son and his wife came for dinner. I had made pot roast, the same one I have always made, and we sat around the table like a family. It felt almost normal. My son talked about work. She asked about my neighbor's renovation. I poured decaf and got out the shortbread I had made from a recipe my mother gave me. Then, near the end of the evening, she set a folder on the table. It was a purchase agreement for the house. She had filled in the address, the property description, the assessed value, which she had estimated low, I would later learn, by nearly $40,000. There was a line for my signature. She said they wanted to take it off my hands, to help me, that they could manage the property, and I could move somewhere easier, and they would make sure I was comfortable, that it was what Kenneth would have wanted. She said that last part quietly. She looked at me when she said it. Something in me went very still. I looked at my son. He was looking at the table. I said, "Did you know your father updated his will in March?" The silence that followed was its own answer. I said I would not be signing anything. I said they could leave. My son started to say something, and I said his name once, just his name, and he stopped. They left. I sat at the table for a long time after the headlights disappeared down the driveway. The pot roast was still on the stove. The shortbread was still on the plate. Everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, and nothing was the same at all. I called my solicitor the next morning. He listened carefully and then asked me a number of very specific questions. He asked whether they had presented the document as legally binding. He asked whether I had felt coerced. He asked whether I had signed anything. I had not signed anything. He said that given the history, the old will, the low valuation, the pressure campaign, the presentation of an unofficial purchase agreement, I had grounds to file a formal complaint. He said I should also consider speaking to someone at the Provincial Seniors Protection Office, which I had not known existed until that moment. I called them. A woman named Diane answered and took my information and asked careful, patient questions. She explained that financial elder abuse in Canada, attempting to pressure an elderly person into transferring property or assets through deception or manipulation, was taken seriously and that there were protections in place. I did not know that either. I think a lot of people my age do not know it. The months that followed were not easy. I am not going to tell you they were. There were calls I did not want to make, and documents I did not want to read again, and a meeting in a lawyer's office where my son sat across from me, and I had to look at his face and remember the boy who used to fall asleep on Kenneth's shoulder watching hockey. In the end, no charges were filed. My daughter-in-law had not technically broken a law, though she had come very close. My son had allowed it to happen and had said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The formal complaint resulted in a written caution and a mandatory meeting with a mediator. My son called me 3 months later. He cried on the phone. He said he was sorry. He said she had convinced him it was the right thing, that it was practical, that I would be better off. He said he had told himself that for so long that he had almost believed it. I listened to all of it. I let him say what he needed to say. Then I told him that I needed time, that I was not ready to sit across a dinner table from him and pretend, that if he wanted a relationship with me going forward, it could not include her making decisions on his behalf or mine, and it could not include any more folders. He said he understood. I do not know yet if he does. That is the honest answer. There is a woman at the Café on Inglis Street now who always waves when I come in. That is Frances. She moved back to Halifax last year to be closer to her sister, and sometimes we have coffee together on Thursday mornings. She told me that Kenneth had asked her, very formally, very seriously, to wait until after the summer. He said the summer would be the hardest part, and that by fall I would have found my footing. He knew me well enough to know that I would need to fall first before I could stand up properly. He was right. He usually was. I have not sold the house. I have repainted the front room, which I always found too dark, and I had a small ramp put in at the side entrance because the step was getting to me. Small changes. They feel like mine in a way that nothing felt like mine in those first months. The maples have gone bare now. They will come back in May the way they always do, the same red, the same slow unfurling. Kenneth planted them to outlast us both. I think, for the first time in a long time, that I understand what that means, not as a comfort, not as a sadness, just as a fact about the world, which I am still in, and which I intend to stay in for quite some time yet.